There are some sharpening myths out there, and we took it upon ourselves to at least address one of them, which is that electric knife sharpeners remove too much material. I definitely understand where you're coming from with that. If you compare an electric sharpener to a belt grinder or sander, obviously the job is to remove metal fast. But do you need to remove more material than you have to, or do you remove more material than you have to, or are you just removing it quickly? No. That's kind of what we set here to determine. We took it upon ourselves to do a test that is inherently going to have some subjectivity to it, but we'll explain what we did so that you understand the numbers that we can show you. And picked one specific spot on the knife marked out with a Sharpie. We set a quick edge on those at 20 degrees and then dulled that edge on a diamond stone. Measured that score on the best tester, which measures the amount of force required to cut twine or filament. Mm-hmm. They all scored very similarly between 1,300 and 1,600 grams of force to cut through the filament. That's a pretty dull knife. A used knife, it would probably mimic something that's been in the kitchen and been used, not abused, maybe a couple months without sharpening. Then we sharpened each of those knives, 6 different knives on 6 different sharpeners, recorded how long it took us to get to a sharp edge, which we figured was around a score of 300 grams to cut through that filament on the best tester. That's right in the range of new cutlery, new decent cutlery. But we were satisfied with anything from about the 200s up to about 400. After we dulled the knives, we measured the height of the knife from the spine to the blade with a micrometer. We were in millimeters. We recorded that. And then we set out to sharpen each of the knives. Mm-hmm. Then we were going to measure how much material did it remove to get that knife back to a sharp performance. Something that is average. We didn't strop any of the knives, which is usually not a material removing process. It just hones and removes any final burrs. And we got them to a sharp point. Then we measured again. We recorded the measurement, determined how much material was removed and how sharp the knife was. We graphed those, we kept track of how long it took us, just to get an idea of the main question here. Does an electric knife sharpener remove more material than it needs to get a sharp knife? So we compared the KTS, or the Knife and Tool Sharpener Mark II, and the Chef's Choice as our electric knife sharpeners. And then we got some benchmarks. We sharpened on a whetstone, a bench stone, or a diamond stone, and then some carbides, both the Worksharp and the Smiths. So let's dive in, and we'll talk about each knife really briefly, just what we did or how it may have differed from some of the others, some of the observations we had. We'll throw in some B-roll here. We captured all the footage as we ran this experiment, and then we'll just discuss kind of what we learned, and we'll let the numbers speak for themselves, but we'll also give you our commentary. All right, starting with knife number 1. Again, process was the same for every single knife as far as the initial setup and what we were dealing with. Mm-hmm. But the whetstone was dulled to 1254. That was actually probably the sharpest prior to getting started. Yep. But then we sharpened on the coarse side of the whetstone, then the fine side at 6,000. I did have to revisit it to get it within the range that we felt was sharp. I will admit I can still improve my whetstone sharpening. So likely it was just based on my inconsistency, but slowing down a little bit. Took about 9 minutes, and we had a decently sharp edge.
Yeah, 292.
Yeah, the thing here, our measurement shows that we removed 1.15 millimeters, which if you look at the rest of them, you'll see that that is a bit of an outlier. And my assumption was that the whetstone might be our baseline for minimal material removal.
So like your whetstone, sharpening might need a little work. My measuring probably needed a little bit of work on that one. It was the first thing we measured as far as knives go. And it's been a while since I used the micrometer, micrometer. And I don't think I got a good measurement on it, to be completely just frank with you. So I think there's probably some outlier there as far as how the measurement was done on it, which is probably accounting for a lot of that. Because if we did 1.15 millimeters worth of material, I feel like there'd be like a pile of
obviously
shavings.
there is some, but that happens so easily, and the whetstone holds everything, whereas a diamond stone, it kind of just disappears, so you don't get to see that. Definitely feels like an outlier. Yep. Kind of rule it out and move on, unless I don't know, have one of you done a similar experiment and removed 1 millimeter of material in 9 minutes on a whetstone? That feels like a lot. But it was actually reasonable time to sharpen. A lot of people say whetstones just take forever, and 9 minutes was not like far and away longer than everything else.
Granted, you were concentrating on a small part of the blade to make sure that we were hitting that spot.
Yeah, we did focus specifically just on kind of on this section. Actually, that's interesting. When I hold it in the light, I can totally see that reflecting light differently in that middle part from the others. I still enjoy the sharpening process on a whetstone. I think you can get great results, especially, and it's probably true with all these knives, if you stropped them, you would instantly step it up to a whole other level of sharp. Yeah. Next up on the bench stone or the diamond stone, this was the next most material removal, or probably our most material removal.
Again, kind of a surprise to me.
Yeah, 0.74 millimeters. That's almost a full millimeter of removal. It does seem accurate though. That's a coarse diamond. It was really quick, and if you're gonna remove that much material, it's going to have to be quick. And yeah, five minutes, and we had a decent score. Actually, our best score.
Yeah.
All right, so it was the sharpest knife, but it did remove the most material in a reasonable amount of time. But yeah, maybe a takeaway for me on that is to use diamond fewer, or at least use finer diamond. I know that in my, like, I have the field sharpener that I use all the time, and I gotta be careful how much I sharpen on that. It's probably removing more than I think.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add. I mean, it's one of those processes that is controlled because you are manually doing it, and just make sure to check as you're going along to make sure you're getting that burr quickly, and then move on.
Yep, don't spend too much time on the course.
Yep.
Kyle, you sharpened on the chef's choice. That was a bit of a journey. 19 minutes. What was that like for you?
So what happened there, I think, is we are using Wusthof knives, which are typically sharpened at 20 degrees. And so to get to the edge that chef's choice makes, it's a 15-degree edge. So we had to remove a lot of material off the shoulders of the knife. So I think that's where a lot of that time ended up being chewed up. It talked about it in the manual. It says, you know, if you've got a knife that's sharpened at a wider angle like that, you're gonna need to spend some time. It said like 20 strokes per side. It was more than that. That's for sure.
You were probably like 50 strokes per side.
I was there for a while before I could get down to a burr. We got there eventually though. So once we finally did get there, and what was crazy is how little material it ended up removing. It's showing at 0.4 millimeters. So while I may have been removing a lot of materials off the shoulders, as far as the depth of the knife went, it's really surprising. Electric knife sharpener didn't take a whole lot of material off the knife, and got a decent score of 265.
Yep, I can tell the shoulders higher. There was, you know, I don't want to knock chef's choice. This was we definitely ran that knife through those guides a lot, but there's a little scuffing on the blade. I'd be careful if you're using a similar sharpener. Tape the blade, you can avoid that, and really make sure you have a consistent stroke through the sharpener. Plan to take some time if you're changing angle. It was surprising how long that took.
It did. And the only other thing I would add is it was interesting, on the front end, on the heel and the tip of the knife is where the burr formed fastest, and the most material was removed off the knife. You can actually see where it kind of rolls up on the heel. So that was another interesting point with it. I know I was using it the way the directions said, so not sure what happened there.
The next was the KTS Mark II. I sharpened on this one, and our user's guide says 2 to 4 strokes per side for a knife that is dulled, not abused. That's what condition these knives were in. I did 3 per side just to make sure I had a good burr, and then I did 10 per side on the fine. Overall, that took me 2 minutes. Super fast, stupid fast. I honestly probably did 1 more stroke than I needed to on the course just to make sure that we had had a good burr. I didn't even check for a burr until 3, so I could have backed off on that a little bit. It removed less material than I thought, being a belt sharpener. And through our customer service, we definitely hear people ask that question a lot. That's why we thought this would be interesting to do. And so I was like, oh, maybe it does remove more. Really, 0.18 millimeters is pretty light. I think that's totally reasonable. And keep in mind, if you don't want a tool that removes metal that quickly, then maybe the KTS or the knife and tool sharpener isn't the sharpener you're looking for. I just keep that in mind. If you want to get in, get out, get sharp, that's going to do that job. Clearly the fastest sharpener, even faster than, you know, one of these just carbide rippers that's really quick, no belt change, no nothing there.
Yeah.
The carbides. Kyle, you mastered the carbides. Kind of.
Yeah.
I was having a hard time getting it all the way sharp. I think I wasn't going heavy-handed enough. In general, relatively similar, I think. I noticed, so Kyle was sharpening on the Smiths and I was sharpening on the Work Sharp, and Kyle like checked to see if his knife was sharp on the Smiths, and it wasn't sharp. So I obviously thought I should do better, and I grabbed it and I was like, well, let me see this. What I did was I tipped the carbide to get some rake so that it would maybe cut faster. A tip that I took from the pivot and how it gets its name, because our pivots pivot, and that gives some rake angle. So I tried that. It worked pretty well. Got us where we needed to go. And then I was somehow reluctant to apply the same amount of pressure on ours. I thought it didn't need it necessarily. Turns out you can be a little heavy-handed on them.
Yeah, it was interesting. You finished on this one, and I ended up finishing for you on that one. So I don't know what that says about our little science experiment, other than that, yeah, sometimes it just takes a little more time than you thought.
Yeah, not usually my favorite way to sharpen a knife on a carbide, but hey, it worked. And by comparison, only talking about material removed and time spent and sharpness, not like condition of the edge and, did it grab anything? If there were any nicks, a carbide can sometimes make those worse.
Right.
So I would avoid that for repairs, but that's not what we're dealing with. So in general, the Smiths removed 0.33 or 1/3 of a millimeter, and the Work Sharp removed less. My theory on that is that the convex shape of the carbide only removes at the very tip, and instead of, so if these Wusthoffs had about a 20-degree angle on them, it may have put closer to like a 25.
Oh, okay.
And so it would have needed to remove less material to reestablish that cutting edge, whereas the Smiths, it may be right at 20. I don't know exactly what angle that's set at, but it's going to need to remove a little bit more to get there.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of variables you could have been fighting here, from the chef's choice sharpening at 15 to what angles these are at. There is some variance there, but we just wanted to give you mainly an idea of, we're really not removing that much material, whether you're using a carbide, a stone, a whetstone, or a powered sharpener. That was kind of the whole idea, is how much more is the powered sharpener taking off? And by looking at these results, I mean, not much at all, really.
Yeah, they're on the lower end of the material removal. Kyle, what's one takeaway from you?
The biggest one I'd say is check often for a burr, no matter what system you're using. As soon as you raise that burr, you're ready to go ahead and start working on the opposite side of that blade. That's going to keep the material removable to a minimum, no matter what system you're using, whether it's an electric or a stone or a diamond plate. Just check for that burr and be as efficient as possible to keep that material removal to a minimum.
I think that all these knives reached a similar level of sharpness in general, and I think that stropping them would have brought them to that next level. So if you're looking at this thinking, hey, but I want to get even sharper, to Kyle's point exactly, after you've raised the burr and then repeat it on the other side, you're really not changing or removing any more material. You're refining the edge that's already there. Use light pressure, and progress down the grits that you have available, including stropping if that's an option.
Yeah, I'd say to add on to that, if before you sharpen, make sure your knife needs to be sharpened. You might be able to get away with a honing or a stropping alone and not have to remove any material off the knife. Just get it back into fighting shape and you're good to go. But if it does need to, there's some tips there to keep it at a minimum.
One last thing that I guess I have to throw in here would be if you're really sharpening to avoid material removal. This is a grail knife. This is something that you're like preserving forever. Alternate sides like every time, and the burr that you're going to feel is going to be really minimal. But as you bring each side closer and closer, you'll know the moment that you do if you can check for the burr, and then you don't have to reestablish or regrind the other side down. That's when material removal can happen. And Chef's Choice does a good job in their instructions. They instruct to alternate sides from the beginning. On the Work Sharp Mark II, I did 3 strokes on one side. Potentially, if I would have gone back and forth, I could have gotten away with 2, maybe 1 stroke per side. I'm really not sure. That's just how I'm used to sharpening on it, and that's the way we instruct people. But obviously, you can use it however you like to get the results you're looking for.
Yeah, the doing one side and feeling for a burr just ensures success more often. So it's an easier way to make sure that you're feeling for that burr. It is hard to feel a burr when you're alternating strokes. Like you have to use your nail pretty much to feel for that burr. So it's just kind of the take you want to go. Do you want to alternate strokes and feel for that tiny little burr and make sure you don't remove much material, or do you want to, you know, feel for that bigger burr by doing one side than the other? It's just preference.
All right, what do you guys think? Do electric knife sharpeners remove too much material? Our verdict is no. They're middle of the pack, and it all depends on how you use them.